Really, there's no big deal with conditionals. There are so many similarities between Polish and English that it would be pointless and very boring to start from first principles and work through all the different possibilities, so we won't. The problem for Poles is the same problem we've run into many times already in these films. People use a strange mix of what seems natural and what they believe they should use because of the rules. And sometimes there's a conflict between these. Now, as before, I believe if you look at it from the inside, the whole picture looks rather different and much simpler. So, we're going to have a look at the elements people find difficult with a little help from Fiddler on the Roof. Specifically, there's a song, If I Were a Rich Man, which gives several lovely examples of conditional constructions in English. So, if we take out the yabba-dabba-dabba stuff and the biddy-biddy-bum, we're left with sentences like these. If I were a rich man, I would build a big tall house. If I were a rich man, I would see my wife looking like a rich man's wife with a proper double chin. I wouldn't have to work hard if I were a wealthy man. And of course, at the end of the song, the climactic question that Tevye addresses to God, would it spoil some vast eternal plan if I were a wealthy man? One of the first things people notice is this strange and confusing use of I were, if he were, if she were, it were, instead of was. Now, for most native speakers, and many don't bother, who use this construction, it's known as the subjunctive form, but it isn't something you think about and decide, it's just habit, like almost everything else. Now, whether or not they use it depends mostly on the spoken environment they grew up in, and whether or not their school teachers were concerned about this very minor point. If you like it and you remember to use it, then as usual, you don't need to change. If it bothers you and you aren't sure about it, don't use it. It's perfectly normal and acceptable to use I was, he was, she was, it was. So, for example, if I was a rich man, I would build a big tall house. If he was a rich man, he would see his wife looking like a rich man's wife with a proper double chin. She wouldn't have to work hard if she was a wealthy woman. Would it spoil some vast eternal plan if I was a wealthy man? These are all okay. Why learn to speak like the Queen of England when 99.9% of English speakers don't? Now we've cleared up that issue, I have a strange question for you to think about. Look again at the first example. If I was a rich man, I would build a big tall house. The question is, what tense is this in? Past, present, or future? The more you look at the example, the stranger the question becomes. It's not talking about the possibility of being rich in the future. It's not talking about the past because obviously it hasn't happened. It's speculating about the idea of being rich generally in contrast to Tevye's current reality. Here's another more recent example from Freddie Mercury. If I could only reach you, that would really be a breakthrough. As we can see from this example, this is where it's okay to use could as column 2 for can with no possibility of confusion. Of course, if you weren't completely confident using it this way, then you could say, if I was only able to reach you. But don't try it in a karaoke bar. Okay, so after an entire series of films, we come back to one of the very first things we talked about. This strange tense that is not a tense. If we look at it from this point of view, suddenly a lot of the weird little things about English conditionals start to make a bit more sense. Let's state it again. If I was a rich man, I would build a big tall house is the general case. It's not particularly tied to any point in time, so in the picture it belongs very definitely in the cloud in the middle. Now, one way of looking at it is that in English the word if tends to push everything one step into the future. Well, it can. So to balance things out, the verb needs to go one step into the past. If that doesn't make sense, have a look at this. If I buy a house. Now, this isn't speculating generally anymore. We know how that's done. If I bought a house. And this is different. This is now talking about something that hasn't happened but might. It's future speculation. So even though I buy is general, the if I buy can be future. There's no need to say if I will buy. So we can say if I buy a house, I will paint it red. If we visit London, we will need a lot of money for beer. If you go to the shops, could you buy some coffee? If they're there, would you ask them for my trousers? These examples are all very definitely future. Whereas, if I bought a house, I would paint it red is general speculation. The same as I drink beer is a general statement and not specifically the present. Now, when we want to use conditionals in the past tense, can we use the same reasoning to work out what we need? Yes we can. Let's go back to the picture. So we're using if and column 2 for the general case. We use if and column 1 for the future without will. So if we want to use conditionals in the past, we need some way to get more past than column 2. Now we know from a previous film that column 2 past and column 3 past are not different in terms of time, only in terms of how specific we want to be. So how do we get more past? Well, it's actually very simple. When we looked at the normal past tenses, we saw have and column 3. Now there is another tense which uses had with column 3. We don't usually bother with it, but if you need to get more past than column 2 past and column 3 past, it's perfect. So here's the Bellamy Brothers lyric expressed in the past. If I had said you had a beautiful body, would you have held it against me? Now, as you can see, we used if I or you, etc. had column 3, would you have column 3? Or if we want a statement instead of a question, if you had column 3, you would have column 3. For example, if we had gone to Jamaica, we would probably have drunk rum. If they had eaten the salmon mousse, they would have died. If they had eaten the salmon mousse, would they have died? She would have been better off if she had never met him. Would she have been better off if she had never met him? In the last example, the usual order has been reversed, but they're still past conditional. You try it. Put these from the general into the past tense. If you had bought the drinks, I would have bought the food. If I had been a rich man, I would have built a big tall house. Would she have come even if she had not been invited to the party? Okay, if we look at what we know so far, we should be able to work everything out. We know that for whatever tense we need, the verb on the if side has to move one tense into the past, because if pushes it one step the other way. We know that on the other side, the would could side, we don't need any tricks. We know that if we want to talk about now, we should use to be and column 1-ing. We know that in the complete tense picture, it's perfectly okay to use I am wanting as a future tense. So it should be okay to use I would be wanting for the conditional future as well as for now. You can see how the system works. If you remember the trick with if and how to do the more past tense, then you can construct any conditional you need. So here's the picture. Pause the video and take a look around. Now, have a look at the following examples. Some of them are complex, but if you take your time and use the picture, you should soon find that they all make sense. If he had been listening to me, we wouldn't be in this mess. Would we be here if she hadn't done that? If you were thinking about going to Mexico next year, don't you think it would be better if you learned to speak Spanish? I wouldn't worry about it if I were you. If they hadn't been concentrating on what they were doing, they could have found themselves driving in the wrong country. Okay, the next video is the last. We will wrap things up and we'll throw in a few small bonus items. You're nearly finished.